China just rejected a direct accusation from Donald Trump that a seized Iranian-bound ship was a gift from China. That is not a diplomatic disagreement. That is a signal of something much bigger breaking beneath the surface. Okay, before I walk you through this, where are you watching this from, and what is your read on what is about to happen? Drop it in the comments. And stay until the end, because the probability I assign in the final report will change how you see this entire situation. Here is what most people miss. This is not about one ship. This is about three players: the United States, Iran, and China, all interacting inside a confined geographic space under conditions where every move is interpreted as escalation. Picture this: an Iranian-flagged cargo ship leaves China. It moves through contested waters toward Iranian ports. The United States has a blockade in place. The ship attempts to evade that blockade. U.S. forces fire on it. They seize it. Now, Iran calls it armed piracy. China says this was normal trade. And Donald Trump says this ship was a gift from China to Iran. That is not a disagreement about facts. That is a clash of narratives. And narratives shape strategy. In geopolitics, what you call an action often matters more than the action itself. Now, let me simplify the game theory. You have three rational actors. The United States wants to enforce pressure on Iran. The blockade is part of that pressure. Cut off supply lines, weaken the opponent without direct full-scale war. Iran's incentive is the opposite: break the blockade, maintain economic flow, signal resistance. Because if the blockade holds, Iran loses without firing a shot. And then there is China. This is where it gets interesting. China says this was normal international trade, which means, from their perspective, they are not a participant in the conflict. They are an external economic actor. But here is the problem. If your trade directly sustains a country under blockade, you are not neutral anymore. You are functionally part of the game. Neutrality collapses the moment your actions change the battlefield. Now layer geography on top of this. We are talking about maritime routes connected to Iranian ports, narrow sea lanes, monitored waters, high military presence. Think about the constraints. Ships cannot just disappear. They follow predictable routes. They move slowly. They are exposed, which means interception is not just possible, it is expected. And that changes the strategic equation entirely. This is not land warfare. This is controlled maritime pressure. This is what controlled escalation looks like: limited actions with unlimited consequences. Now let's talk about asymmetry. The United States has overwhelming naval power. It can enforce a blockade. It can intercept ships. Iran cannot match that directly. So what does Iran do? It reframes. It calls the seizure armed piracy. Why? Because that shifts the narrative from enforcement to illegitimacy. And narrative matters because it builds justification for retaliation. Iran has already warned of retaliation. Pay very close attention to that word. Not response, not protest, retaliation. That means the next move is already being considered. Language is not decoration in geopolitics. It is preparation. Now bring China back into this. China rejects the accusation completely, says there is no factual basis, emphasizes that normal trade should not be disrupted. That sounds like a standard diplomatic response. But think about what it actually implies. China is drawing a red line, not militarily, but economically. They are saying trade flows should continue, regardless of conflict conditions. And that directly conflicts with the US objective of economic pressure on Iran. So now you have overlapping strategies. The US strategy, restrict. Iran's strategy, bypass. China's position, continue. Three different incentives. One, shared space. This is not stable. This is what game theorists call an unstable triangle. Three players, no aligned incentives, constant friction. Now I'm going to give you the key question that defines everything that comes next. Is this an isolated maritime incident? Or is this the early stage of a broader strategic confrontation, where enforcement actions, economic flows, and retaliatory threats begin to stack on top of each other? Because the answer to that question determines whether this stays contained or turns into something much larger. And that is exactly what we are going to break down in the next report. Okay, let me walk you through this step by step. There are three realistic scenarios here, not 10, not 20, 3. And each one follows a clear game theory structure. Scenario 1, containment. This is the version where everything stops exactly where it is right now. The United States enforces the blockade. Iran protests, calls it piracy, but does not escalate beyond rhetoric. China denies involvement and continues diplomatic positioning without direct confrontation. This is what game theorists would call a temporary equilibrium. Not stable, not peaceful, but contained. Why would this happen? Because escalation is costly. For the United States, pushing further risks drawing China closer into the conflict, something Washington does not want in a maritime environment tied to global trade. For Iran, escalation risks triggering overwhelming military response. And for China, escalation risks disruption of trade routes, which directly hits its economic interests. So all three players have an incentive to pause. Sometimes the most rational move is to do nothing, not because it is safe, but because every alternative is worse. Now let's assign probability. Probability, 25 to 30%. Why not higher? Because the language coming out of this incident is already too sharp. Armed piracy, gift from China, no factual basis. Those are not cooling words. Those are positioning words. And positioning leads to action. Okay, scenario 2, controlled escalation. This is the one most analysts stop at, but there is a second layer. In this scenario, Iran responds, but not directly against the United States in a full-scale way. Instead, asymmetric response, harassment in maritime routes, pressure on shipping lanes, indirect actions that raise the cost of enforcement without triggering full war. This is the classic asymmetric model. We have seen this before. Does this sound familiar? It should. This is the same structure as past maritime tensions in the region. Limited actions designed to signal capability without crossing the threshold into open conflict. Asymmetric warfare is not about winning battles. It is about changing the cost of the game. Now, bring geography back in. Narrow sea lanes, high traffic, energy routes. You do not need to shut them down completely to create impact. You just need to make them uncertain. And uncertainty does something very specific. It raises insurance costs. It slows trade. It increases global prices. Think about what that actually means. You are not just targeting ships. You are targeting the global economy. Disrupt the route and you do not need to control it. The damage is already done. Now layer China into this scenario. China continues trade, but more carefully. More deniability, more distance, less visibility. They do not confront directly, but they also do not stop, because stopping would mean accepting US control over trade flows, and that is a precedent China cannot allow. So the game continues. Pressure, response, adjustment. This is not war. This is something more dangerous. A sustained, low-level conflict where every move increases tension without triggering resolution. Probability, 50 to 55%. This is the one that keeps analysts awake, because it does not end quickly, it drags, and drag conflicts are where mistakes happen. Okay, scenario 3, escalation spiral. This is where it goes wrong. Iran retaliates in a way that crosses a line. Not symbolic, not indirect, something that forces a visible US response. And once that happens, the game changes. Because now you are no longer in a controlled environment. You are in a reaction cycle. Action, response, counter-response. And here is where China becomes critical. China does not need to send military forces to be involved. All it needs to do is increase economic or political support to Iran. And suddenly, this is no longer a two-player game. It is a multi-layered confrontation. This is what escalation looks like. Not a single explosion, but a chain reaction. Now think about history. Iraq 2003, rapid escalation after initial triggers. Vietnam, gradual escalation through sustained pressure and response. Afghanistan, long drawn-out conflict where the stronger power struggled against asymmetric tactics. Which model does this resemble? It is closer to Vietnam than Iraq. Slow escalation, indirect conflict, no clear endpoint. And that is the danger, because slow escalation is harder to stop. Now probability. Probability, 15 to 20%, lower than the others. But here is the key, rising. Every sharp statement, every interception, every retaliation threat pushes this probability higher. Low probability does not mean low risk. It means high impact if it happens. And if this scenario unfolds, we are no longer talking about a ship. We are talking about a regional conflict with global consequences. Now step back. 3 scenarios. Containment, unlikely. Controlled escalation, most likely. Escalation spiral, lower probability, highest danger. And here's the part almost nobody is talking about. All 3 scenarios lead to economic consequences. The only difference is how fast and how severe. So now we move to the final question. What does this actually mean for you? What just happened in the open water between a US blockade, an Iranian ship, and a Chinese denial is not contained to that location. It is already moving toward your daily life. Okay, let's strip this down to its real-world impact. You are looking at a maritime tension zone connected to global trade routes. Not a small one, not a regional one. A system where energy, goods, and raw materials move through predictable, vulnerable pathways. Now think about what happens when those pathways become uncertain. Not blocked, not destroyed, uncertain. Markets do not wait for disruption. They react to the possibility of it. This is where most people misunderstand how fast this hits. The moment risk increases in shipping lanes, insurance costs rise. Shipping companies reroute. Delays begin, costs stack. And those costs do not stay at sea. They move. Fuel prices, food prices, manufacturing costs, everything that depends on movement becomes more expensive. Think about what that actually means. You are not paying for the conflict itself. You are paying for the risk of the conflict expanding. The global economy runs on predictability. Remove that, and everything becomes more expensive. Now connect this to the most likely scenario, controlled escalation. This is not a short shock. This is sustained pressure, weeks, months, possibly longer. Every small incident adds friction. Every friction point adds cost. And those costs accumulate quietly until suddenly they are not quiet anymore. You see it at the gas pump. You see it in grocery bills. You see it in inflation numbers that do not make sense until you trace them back to this exact kind of situation. Okay, now take the escalation scenario, the one at 15 to 20%. This is where the impact accelerates. If retaliation crosses a visible line and the US responds and China increases support, even indirectly, you now have a layered conflict affecting one of the most sensitive systems on the planet. Energy flow, trade flow, confidence, and confidence is everything. Confidence is the invisible currency of the global economy. Once it breaks, everything else follows. Imagine you are a business owner. Do you invest or do you wait? Imagine you are a shipping company. Do you take the shortest route or the safest one? Imagine you are a government. Do you stabilize prices or prepare for volatility? Now multiply those decisions across the entire world. That is how localized tension becomes global consequence. This is not a movie. There is no single moment where everything changes. It is gradual, then sudden. Crises do not arrive fully formed. They build quietly, then reveal themselves all at once. Now, step back and look at the structure. 3 players, conflicting incentives, shared geography, no clear off-ramp. This is what game theorists call a Nash equilibrium in a negative-sum game. Each player makes the best decision available to them, and everyone still loses. The United States enforces pressure, but risks escalation. Iran resists, but increases instability. China continues trade, but gets pulled into the conflict indirectly. No one is acting irrationally. That is what makes this dangerous. The most dangerous conflicts are not caused by irrational actors, but by rational ones with incompatible goals. Now, bring it back to you. This is not about choosing sides. This is about understanding structure. Because once you understand the structure, you stop being surprised. You start anticipating. You see why a single ship matters. You see why language like armed piracy signals future action. You see why a denial from China is not just a denial, it is a strategic position. And most importantly, you see where this goes next. Not with certainty, but with probability. And that changes how you react, how you prepare, how you interpret what you are being told. What looks like noise to most people is signal to those who understand the system. Now listen carefully. What I want you to take away is not fear. Fear is not useful. What is useful is understanding. Because when you understand the game theory, the geography, the incentives, the weaknesses of each player, you can see what is coming before it happens. And that is the most powerful thing you can have in a world that is changing this fast.